Have you ever felt like something in your life never made sense, but you weren't sure what it was? Sometimes the truth doesn't come with a bang. It comes in a whisper, in a sentence spoken by a stranger, in a random place, like a drugstore on a rainy afternoon. That's how it all started for me. I thought my name was Jessica Thompson. I had a job, loving parents, memories organized in scrapbooks, but it only took 5 words for all of that to shake me up. It was a typical Tuesday, the kind you just want to get over with. I was there, sick, waiting for an antibiotic, when a woman looked at me like she'd seen a ghost. "You look like my sister," she said. I smiled, the way we do to be polite. But she wasn't kidding. Her eyes filled with tears. That's when everything changed. My identity, my past, my idea of family. What would you do if you found out that maybe you weren't who you always thought you were? This is a true story, made of broken memories, family secrets, and reunions that hurt and heal at the same time. A story about what happens when the life you know falls apart, and in the midst of the rubble, you find yourself for the first time. That Tuesday started out like any other. Light rain in Portland, a pounding headache, and the promise of a long day. I went to the pharmacy just to get an antibiotic. Nothing out of the ordinary. I had sinusitis, was in a bad mood, and was in a hurry. I didn't know that in a few minutes my entire life would be put at risk by a seemingly simple sentence. The line was long, the place was stuffy, the fluorescent lights buzzing and annoying. As I waited, an older woman looked at me as if she'd been shocked. She stopped breathing for a second. Then she whispered, "You look like my sister." I admit I smiled politely. It was the kind of thing I'd been told before, the familiar face thing. But there was no kindness in her eyes, only astonishment. Her hands were shaking, her eyes were filling with tears. "She disappeared 25 years ago," she said. My heart froze inside. Suddenly, I was no longer just another customer in line. The pharmacy seemed too small, as if the walls were closing in. My smile disappeared along with my peace of mind. She described me in details no one was supposed to know. The scar above my eyebrow, my green eyes with golden highlights, even the birthmark on my shoulder, the shape of a crescent moon. Everything she said was true. Things I thought were just my unique features. But how could a stranger know that? When she said her sister's name, Rachel Marie Anderson, something inside me snapped. Rachel was my middle name. A name my parents said my late grandmother had given me. But the way she said it, the way she looked at me, it was like I was looking at someone she'd never stopped searching for. And it shook me more than I cared to admit. Even though I tried to maintain control, I dropped the medicine bottle. The pills scattered across the floor, but no one moved to pick them up. I couldn't think, much less breathe properly. It was as if the ground beneath my feet had turned to quicksand. My mind screamed no, but my body knew. Something very wrong was surfacing. I ran from the pharmacy as if the building was going to collapse. Rain on my face, hands shaking, my heart beating like an alarm. When I got into my car, I sat in the driver's seat and cried. It wasn't sadness or pain. It was the feeling that my entire history was cracking right before my eyes, and that maybe I really was someone who disappeared 25 years ago. It was as soon as I heard that name, Rachel Marie Anderson, that something inside me snapped. My body froze, but my mind raced like a car without brakes. It was a name that meant nothing to me, but at the same time, I seemed to recognize every syllable. I didn't know what was true and what was just a suggestion, but the feeling was like finding a letter hidden in the wrong drawer. There, in the middle of the drugstore, the stranger had just dropped a bomb on my existence. The woman spoke with a conviction that disarmed me. She didn't sound confused or delirious. She sounded hurt. Every time she said Rachel, it was as if she were summoning someone who still lived inside her. I tried to rationalize it all away, coincidence perhaps, but when she mentioned the scar on my eyebrow, my skin crawled. How did she know that? My body was acting automatically. I took a step back, tried to smile, pretended that everything was fine. But inside, the ground had already disappeared from under my feet. Everything I had ever believed about myself seemed to slip through my fingers. How can I trust my own memories when a stranger knows details about my body, my childhood, my essence. Even though I tried to deny it, something inside me was already unraveling. When she mentioned the birthmark on my shoulder, the shape of a crescent moon, I froze. How could she know that? It was my secret, something intimate, almost poetic. A longtime boyfriend had called it my talisman, and now some strange woman was using it as proof of who I was? In that moment, I realized that what was at stake wasn't just my name. It was my entire story. My childhood, my parents, the photos on the shelf, the birthdays. It all began to look like a painting too beautiful to be real. If I wasn't who I thought I was, then who was? And who had shaped this new identity in me? As the questions piled up, the woman pulled a photo from her purse. It was a smiling girl with missing teeth, green eyes like mine, and the same eyebrow shape. Looking into that face was like looking into a mirror from another life. It was me, but it also wasn't me. A forgotten duplicate, a living reminder of something that had perhaps been stolen from me. I ran out of the pharmacy like someone running away from a fire. The medicine bottle fell to the floor, along with my calm, my certainty, my identity. I felt the rain on my face, but I didn't care. The only thing I wanted at that moment was to hide. From the world, from the truth, and from myself. When I got home, the silence seemed to scream. I slammed the door shut, as if that would be enough to keep the world out. My head was pounding, and questions came flooding back. What if that woman was right? What if everything my parents told me was just a well-told story? What would I do if my identity really was borrowed? I went straight to the bookshelf where I kept my photo albums. I pulled out the oldest one, Jessica, early years, and flipped through it quickly, as if expecting to see something different from what had always been there. It started with my 3rd birthday. Chocolate on my face, party hat falling to the side. But it only started there. There were no photos before that. The absence was a blow. No baby pictures, no pictures of the first time she crawled, no pictures of motherhood. Nothing. I tried to remember if I had ever questioned this before. Maybe I had, maybe not. My parents had always said there had been a fire and everything was lost. At the time, it had seemed like an acceptable answer. Now it sounded too convenient. I picked up the phone and called my mom. When she answered with her sweet, familiar voice, I almost gave up. How do you confront someone who taught you how to tie your shoes? But the words were out before I could stop them. Why don't I have pictures of myself before I was 3? The silence on the other end wasn't normal. It was heavy, thick, calculated. She tried to stick to her version of events about the fire. She said we lived in California, that the house burned down, that everything was lost. But she couldn't remember the address. She was hesitant about details. How could someone forget where they lived with their little girl? It started to erode the image of perfect parents that I had always carried. It was like seeing cracks in a stained glass window. I hung up the phone, shaking. I walked into the bathroom, took off my shirt, and looked at my left shoulder in the mirror. There it was, the crescent-shaped birthmark. I'd always thought it was charming. Now it felt like a seal of authenticity, or of something that should never have been hidden. It was the first concrete piece of an uncomfortable puzzle. I called my best friend Ashley. I told her everything. The woman at the pharmacy, the scar, the photo, the mark. She listened to me with wide eyes and a pounding heart. What if it's true? She asked. And for the first time, I didn't answer. Because deep down, I already knew. Something was very wrong, and the truth, as painful as it was already staring back at me in the mirror. 3 days later, I sat across from her in a quiet cafe, the kind of place where mothers sip cappuccino after dropping their kids off at school. Carol arrived with a bulging briefcase and a look of anticipation and hope in her eyes. It was as if she had spent the last 25 years waiting for this very moment. And in a way, she had. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice shaking, as if I might evaporate at any second. She opened the folder carefully, as if handling fragile memories. First came the newspaper clippings. Old headlines, blurry photos, reports of a missing girl named Rachel. Denver, 1998, the date read. 7-year-old girl disappears from backyard. I stared at the image of the girl. It was my face, my gaze, the same scar. Then came the details. Rachel was left-handed, like me. She had green eyes with gold highlights, like mine. She had a scar over her right eyebrow, like me, and a birthmark on her left shoulder in the shape of a crescent moon. It was like someone had described my body in a police report. "You have all of it," Carol said, her voice breaking. "Every bit of it." She pulled a small stuffed elephant from her purse, weather-beaten but intact. "You called him Peanut," she murmured. A shiver ran down my spine. I knew that toy. Or I thought I did. It was as if something inside me was echoing, like a muffled memory of a forgotten dream. I held the elephant carefully. It felt familiar. Carol told me about the day she disappeared. Her mother's phone call, the open gate, the desperate search. She showed me the last photo of Rachel, her eating cereal, smiling and missing her 2 front teeth. She wanted pictures of everything that week, Carol said, her eyes welling up. And there was another piece that fit together, my inexplicable obsession with documenting everything as a child. Finally, she handed me a DNA kit. "I've already done mine," she said. "If you want to know the truth, this is all you need." The small tube in my hands felt like it held the weight of a lifetime. It was frightening to think that in just a few days, this test would confirm what I was already beginning to feel. I was not who I thought I was. I was Rachel, and Carol was my sister. In that silent cafe, with the distant sound of cups being stacked and muffled conversations, something changed inside me. It wasn't just a growing doubt. It was an identity that was falling apart. And for the first time, I asked myself, who am I, if everything I've experienced so far has been based on a lie carefully maintained by the people who claim to love me the most? I took a deep breath, clicked, and read the sentence that turned what was left of my certainty into dust. 9.9% genetic match with Carol Anderson. It was official. I was Rachel Marie Anderson, and my life, as I knew it, was over. I cried alone on the bathroom floor for hours. It wasn't grief, it wasn't relief, it was a raw, nameless kind of grief. It was as if every memory I had lost the weight of reality. Everything was real, but with a different name, a different origin. My childhood, my parents, my last name. Nothing had been as I'd been told. It was like being born again, but this time, aware of the rupture. I decided to face the truth, head on. On Sunday, I went to my parents' house, or the ones I knew as my parents. They greeted me with smiles, but the mood changed as soon as they saw my eyes. I placed the envelope with the report on the table. "We need to talk," I said. My mother looked at the paper and immediately began to cry. My father turned pale. They knew, and now, so did I. "We wanted so badly to have a child," my mother began, sobbing. "We tried for years. After so many losses, we thought it would never happen." Then they told me about the contact who offered them a child. According to them, the mother was a drug user and had abandoned her daughter. But there was one detail that condemned them. They never tried to verify the story. They never tried to find out where I really came from. "You've seen my face on billboards for years," I said. "How could you ignore it?" They looked away. My father murmured, "We avoided watching the news. It was too painful to think it might be true. They changed their names, their towns, their lives. And they raised me as if everything had started from scratch. But nothing erases what came before. Nothing. The legal process was long and complicated. They were charged with identity fraud and custodial interference. Because they were elderly, had clean records, and because I refused to see them in prison, they were given alternative sentences. The courts pardoned them part of their sentences. I haven't yet. Love doesn't disappear overnight, but trust does. And I needed to understand my past before I could decide what to do with them in the present. The truth tasted bitter, but it was liberating. For the first time, the questions that had haunted me since I was a child had answers. My name, my origins, my story. I wasn't just Jessica. I was Rachel, too. And now, more than ever, I knew I needed to meet the family that had spent 25 years mourning my absence. It was time to take the next step. Meeting Emma was like looking into a mirror 25 years out of date. We had the same eyes, the same crooked smile, even the same muffled laugh. When she first saw me, her eyes filled with silent tears. There was no speech, just a long, tight hug, full of things neither of us knew how to say. It was a reunion of sisters, separated by pain, united by hope. Emma's children called me the aunt who was lost. Lily, 7, said with the sweetness only a child can, "You're back for the happy ending." And I wanted to believe it. I met the Andersons at a Sunday barbecue. Aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors who had put up posters, held vigils, prayed for me. People who never forgot me, even though they didn't know I was alive. Each hug from them was a small stitch in the wound of time. But the most surprising thing was how I felt among them. It wasn't like visiting strangers. It was like returning to an old house where every smell, every sound, every look awakened something I hadn't even known still lived inside me. Vague memories began to emerge. My father's voice calling me to dinner, Emma braiding my hair, the rusty swing in the backyard, fragments of a kidnapped childhood. I kept the name Jessica in my professional life, but I added Rachel to my documents. Jessica Rachel Anderson Thompson. A way to honor the one who raised me and waited for me. A bridge between two worlds. It was strange, confusing, and yet complete. I was both. The beloved daughter who grew up with affection, and the missing sister who returned from an interrupted past. My time with Carol also gained a special place. We saw each other every Tuesday. She told me about the childhood I had that I didn't remember. She brought me photos, stories, recipes. Sometimes she gave me her old stuffed elephant, Peanut. When I held him, time seemed to go back. It was as if, even without remembering, my body knew exactly who I was in that other life. Of course, none of this erased the trauma. There were times when I found myself crying for no reason or doubting my own memory. I was in therapy, as were my adoptive parents. Emma, too. It was a long road to rebuilding, but at least now we were walking together as a family. A family that was broken, remade, and reborn with a strength that only love can create. This new part of my life taught me something precious. Belonging doesn't come from blood alone. It comes from bonds. And even though 25 years had passed, there was still time to create new moments, new stories, new memories. Because finding yourself again in the eyes of someone who never gave up on you is a rare and powerful kind of rebirth. Confronting my parents was, without a doubt, the hardest moment of this entire journey. They greeted me with a smile, like any other Sunday. But when they saw my serious face, they knew something was different. "We need to talk," I said, holding the DNA test papers in my hand. We sat on the beige couch in the living room, the same one where we had taken so many Christmas photos. The same one where, now, truths needed to be told. My mother burst into tears as soon as she saw the envelope. My father turned pale. "Honey, what is this?" she whispered. I handed her the paper without saying anything. She read it silently, and when she got to the percentage, a 99.9% match for Carol Anderson, she let out a groan of pain, as if something had ripped inside her. My father, his voice cracking, said only, "We tried so hard. We wanted you so badly." They told me they had been trying to get pregnant for years. 3 miscarriages, adoptions gone wrong. When a distant cousin of my father's showed up offering an abandoned child, they were vulnerable. They said the mother was an addict, that the girl needed another chance, my mother explained. They accepted without asking too many questions, without investigating, without thinking about the consequences. We wanted to believe it was true. They changed their name, their state, their history. They created a narrative, a house that burned down, photos that were lost, roots that were torn out. When they asked me about my origins, they always avoided me. When they saw posters of missing children, they changed the channel. I loved them. And so it hurt even more to know that they hid the truth, that they chose to keep me away from my origins out of fear, out of selfishness. But it was also true that they had given me love. They had been good parents. They had taught me how to ride a bike, how to bake cakes. They had rocked me to sleep when I had a fever. They had cheered me on at school performances. The love was real. But it didn't erase the mistake. It didn't erase the 25 years of pain another family had endured because of me. And I said it, firmly, but not hatefully. because right now I needed to be the adult in that room. They responded with tears and silence. And even with all that, I didn't ask for jail time. I didn't want revenge, just the truth and emotional justice. They faced legal proceedings. They received light sentences, community service and counseling. Their age, the time that had passed, and my decision not to harshen the punishment weighed heavily on the judge's decision. And even then, the weight of their conscience would be the most lasting punishment. At the end of that conversation, my mother held my hand and said, "Even if you can't call me Mom anymore, I will always love you." And I replied, with tears in my eyes, "I will continue to call you Mom. But now it's not just you. I have two." And in that moment, even amidst the rubble and the wounds, a new kind of reconstruction began. Starting over isn't about erasing everything. It's about learning to live with the layers. And that's what I had to do. The first time I saw Emma, my biological sister, I felt a lump in my throat. She looked like me. Her eyes, the way she laughed, even the way she rubbed her chin when she thought. She hugged me like she'd never lost me. Her children called me Aunt Rachel, as if it were natural. And for the first time, I felt part of a past I'd never lived. But that still belonged to me. Carol began to tell me stories about our interrupted childhood. She showed me drawings I had made, clothes I had worn, and even a stuffed elephant named Peanut, which I loved and hugged to sleep. When I touched him, a vague memory passed through my body. A smell, a muffled sound of laughter, an echo of who I had been. We cried together, and we cried more than once. They were not just tears of sadness, but of relief, of reunion, of starting over. At the same time, my relationship with the Thompsons wasn't simply severed. They had been my parents for 25 years. They had loved me, raised me, been there for me. But now, everything was tinged with a different color, with a different truth. We had dinner together once a month. Awkward silences arose, cautious conversations too. They started therapy, and so did I, because no one emerges from a revelation like that whole. And that's okay. Healing takes time too. My therapist told me something I've never forgotten. You don't have to choose between the love you've been given and the love you've been taken away. And that phrase became my guiding light. I could love Carol, Emma, my new family, and still love Susan and Michael, who raised me. What I couldn't do anymore was live my life based on lies. And both sides needed to understand that. I started doing little things with the Andersons: walks, coffees, family gatherings. Little by little, new memories were born. And with the Thompsons, I kept some traditions. Tea with my mother on Sundays, card games with my father. I set limits, but I didn't have to cut anyone off. Sometimes love also means setting limits on how far the other person can go without hurting us. Little by little, I began to adapt to this new me. Legally, I adopted the name Jessica Rachel Anderson Thompson. It was a long name, but it conveyed everything I was now. The missing girl, the woman who survived, and the daughter of two stories. Every part of that name reminded me that I was not erased. I was rescued, and that even amidst the wounds, it was possible to flourish. It wasn't easy. It isn't. There are days when I still find myself asking, what if? But the biggest answer I found was this: love can come from many places. And even when it fails, when it hurts, it can still be healed if there is truth, courage, and forgiveness. And that's exactly what I chose to live. Life after the truth has a different rhythm, calmer, deeper. After the emotional storm, it was time to organize what was left and what was born new. I returned to the pharmacy a few months later, the same one where it all began. I stood there, watching. The same counter, the same cold lights. A new feeling in my chest. It was like returning to the scene of an accident, only with gratitude for having survived. Little by little, the memories began to come back. Some were clear, like flashes from childhood. The red bicycle, the swing in the garden, my biological father's voice calling my name. Others were still blurry, but they didn't hurt as much as before. Carol gave me a box with things she had saved. Drawings, notes, a beaded bracelet I had made myself. It was like putting together a forgotten puzzle, and discovering that the pieces still fit together, I decided to write my story. First, a blog, then interviews, until a local newspaper published my story. Soon, the invitations came. People telling similar stories. Others just wanted to understand how to survive a truth that turns you inside out. And I always answered the same thing. The truth can hurt, but it is the truth that sets you free. And it is better to live shattered by the truth than whole by a lie. I kept both last names, Jessica Rachel Anderson Thompson, a name that embraces the past and the present, a name that reminds me that I was stolen, but I was also loved, that I was lost, but I was also found, that I was hurt, but I was also rebuilt. Today, I no longer choose between who I was and who I am. I am all of them, and I am stronger for it. My relationship with the Thompsons continues, with care, with presence, but without illusions. They made mistakes, serious ones, but they also gave me real affection. And as difficult as it may be, love sometimes lives in contradiction. With Carol, we built a new relationship, as a mother and daughter, but also as two women who survived absence, who found each other again not only through blood, but through the choice not to give up on each other. And what about me? I keep going, working, laughing, learning. I keep having coffee with Ashley, visiting Emma and her children, making new memories with the Andersons and even the Thompsons. My past is no longer a hole, it's a root. My pain no longer defines me, it has shaped me. And my name, the one that so often confused me, is now a shelter. Today I understand. Identity is not what they tell you. It is what you rebuild, piece by piece, with the truths you find along the way. And even if these truths arrive like an earthquake, like 5 words spoken by a stranger, they can be the beginning of something beautiful. Because what breaks us can also heal us. You may think you know your story, that everything is in place, safe, explained. But life has a quiet, and sometimes brutal way of revealing truths that were buried beneath layers of routine. The truth doesn't ask for permission. It simply appears, and when it does, it changes everything. It's not easy to rebuild your identity. It's like learning to walk again on shaky legs of doubt. But it's also liberating, because you are not just what you've lived. You are what you choose to do with what you discover. And even if the answers come late, they can still be the beginning of a new life. My story is not just about a stolen identity. It is about finding new things, about strength, about having the courage to look in the mirror and ask, who am I really? It is about accepting that pain is part of life, but that it does not have to be the end of the road. If you're living in a moment where everything seems meaningless, breathe. Life can still surprise you. And sometimes, the key to finding yourself is in the most ordinary place, like a line at the pharmacy on a rainy Tuesday. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Comment below if you've ever had a discovery that turned your life upside down. And if you want to follow more real stories that show us how life can be extraordinary, even in its most ordinary moments, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. You are not alone. And no matter how confusing the journey may seem, reconnecting with who you are is always worth it.